Καλημέρα. Μ' ακούνε εμένα?
Καλημέρα.
Μ' ακούτε? Καλημέρα, τι κάνετε? Φωτογραφίες και Βαγιάννη. Ωραία, θα πάω τώρα και σε λίγο.
Η καμερούλα να είναι σταθερή.
Ναι, όχι, τώρα θα πάω μέσα στο γραφείο που θα κάνω το όλο στήσιμο. Απλά ήθελα λίγο τώρα τον ήχο να ξέρω και τώρα πάω μέσα να το στήσουμε. Περίπου σε πόση ώρα θα ξεκινήσουμε, έχουμε κάποια αντίληψη?
Περίπου σε 10 λεπτά. Ανάλογα τώρα να είναι όλες στις θέσεις τους μόνο θέλουμε.
Εντάξει, τέλεια.
Εντάξει, έχει ξεκινήσει ήδη το live, να ξέρετε. Παίζει κάρτα στα social media και στο site της Προεδρίας.
Ωραία. Εντάξει. Κλείνω λίγο να πάω να το
Ναι.
θα ανοίγουμε για το τελικό.
Κύριε Υπουργέ, λοιπόν, να κάνουμε ένα cross-check ότι είμαστε OK με τον ήχο. Κύριε Υπουργέ, 1, 2, 3.
Testing interpretation. Good morning to everyone. I would like to welcome you to this event of the Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs with regard to the European Council, where we have the presidency, the Council of Europe, sorry, for this semester. 70 years from the signature of the European Treaty of Human Rights and safeguarding these rights. As a Council of Europe, we are here to showcase a topic regarding the impact of a COVID-19 pandemic on vulnerable groups. I'd like to convey the greetings of Mr. Varvitsiotis, Chairman of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe and alternate Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary General. It is a great honor for me to be here with Ms. Michailidou, Deputy Minister of Labour, and Ms. Bakoyani, a very dear person. I would like to greet this event and this discussion today because it ratifies the very technical title that we've put in the presidency of the Council of Europe, that Greece for the first time will do need chairmanship. It is the very first time that this happens, though we believed that these events organized for fall, September, October, would be live. However, we are still there discussing virtual, and this event, the 130th summit in Athens, will also take place virtually, same as the other two assembling during the chairmanship in June, and other deliberations that we've had. We will talk about important topics, not only about the pandemic, but other topics as well with regard to the protection of human rights, under always the auspices of a Council of Europe. When we undertook this presidency, we tried to think how we can address the challenge of this era better, meaning the COVID-19 challenge. For the first time, countries and governments wanted to restrain basic human rights of free communication, circulation, access to justice, access to work, to employment. There are limitations to all that since the common interest, the common benefit was to protect public health. When we undertook the presidency, we thought this should be the main topic, and we should leave a legacy in the generations to come, which is a roadmap, a declaration, which we will adopt in November in the Committee of Ministers It's the Declaration of Athens, as we've called it, about how we can address such pandemics. Vulnerable groups, sensitive groups of people are the ones affected the most by such conditions. First of all, we can see it in the media every day. There is this stigma for people who have been contaminated by the virus. They're kind of isolated and they're treated as carrying some kind of stigma. We needed to break this stigma in order not to create further problems to the ones that we're having today. Roma, disabled people, single parents, unemployed mothers are amongst these vulnerable groups of people, and society should protect them by giving them equal access to social and public goods, one of each. First and foremost, of course, is health. So this is the reason why we believe that we will include in the Declaration of Athens that health access must be free and equal to everyone, to all COVID-19 patients. There are some data that concern us. We have family violence, which has increased, especially during the lockdown and the quarantine period. And we believe that prevention and fight against violence against women should be a binding text. We need to supervise it. We need to endorse it. We must upkeep it. And as a president here today, I would like to say that Poland and Turkey have said that they want to leave this treaty. For these two countries, that would be a major step backwards. Another major issue is the protection of refugees and immigrants. I'm happy because so far the data that we've had show that the dissemination of the virus in hotspots was kind of limited, as well as in other refugee camps. This makes us quite proud on one hand, but on the other hand, it worries us with regard to the second wave of this pandemic. I believe that the way that the Greek authorities addressed the case of Moria, with the complete destruction of the hotspot due to a fire caused by people hosted in the area, and with the new installations of a new hotspot in a new camp in Karatepe, well, it shows that our country is reliable when it comes to protecting rights of vulnerable groups, amongst which, of course, are refugees and immigrants. Finally, I'd like to underline 2-3 more topics, but I'll be more succinct. One topic which is important in order to address and confront challenges such as COVID-19 pandemic. Well, I believe that the dissemination of fake news is something that, as democratic institutions, we should try and minimize their influences, since fake news create distances stigma, marginalization, and sometimes it leads to making vulnerable groups targets of certain other groups. And statistics are not for stigmatizing vulnerable groups for being carriers of COVID-19. I believe that in our democratic system we were able to address coronavirus quite successfully. All legislative ordinance or government ordinance have been ratified by the parliament, so there is a universal acceptance of all the measures taken. Even the bet of opening schools was a successful bet. Schools opened, and only 1.2% closed because of COVID-19 cases shown in this 1.5 months of operation of schools. I'd like to close by saying that it is a great honor, although we have this conjecture, that we have the 80th anniversary for the Declaration of Human Rights, which is a milestone for the democratic and the legal system. It's also a refuge for all European citizens and all citizens around the world about the way human rights must be defended as principle and as substance. It's an oasis of protection of human rights throughout the planet. So for all of us who have fought for our national law to transpose the Declaration of Human Rights, and I'm saying that because due to the junta, Greece was not a member of the Council of Europe for these 7 years. So I think that now through our Greek presidency, we can, let's say, upgrade our country, especially with the 80th anniversary of the declaration in November 4th. It's not going to be very loud or live. It's going to be done virtually, but it's going to be done from the cradle of democracy, being a big message conveyed from Greece to Europe and to the rest of the world. To us, it's a way of life, but for other peoples, there is still a lot to do. Thank you so much for your attention and for the invitation extended to me. Thank you so much, Minister. I'd like to say that along with these 70 years from the conclusion of the treaty, it's also 31 years for the ratification of the Declaration of Children's Rights under Konstantinos Mitsotakis' government. This makes us even happier, so I will give the floor now to the MP of Hellenic Parliament, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Chairman for the Greek delegation to PACE, a big defender of human rights, Ms. Dora Bakoyannis. You have the floor.
Mr. Minister, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to start, Mr. Secretary General, by thanking you especially for the invitation and this very important initiative for this meeting today. This year has been unique for the global community, for Europe and Greece. Unfortunately, we still suffer the results in our social tolerance and economic tolerance, the economic tolerance, and our psychological tolerance. The pandemic and the new measures have changed our daily life, the way we socialize, the way we work, the way we travel, the way we embrace each other and we love each other, the way that we carry out our daily course. In other words, it has changed us. This change had a lot of complexities and a lot of challenges. But of course, we all know that all challenges go along with opportunities. So Greece was quick enough and had the confidence of its citizens in order to manage to handle this challenge and turn this pandemic into an advantage, as the whole global community acknowledged. And this is what we see coming back to us with the financial trust vested to us by all. A very important factor was that though we did sacrifice a lot, we never sacrificed our solidarity. Major priority of the government from the beginning was to protect human life and especially the more vulnerable groups. We had first the experts and data. Populism was not our weapon, never. And that's why I want to stress what Mr. Vavitsiotis said. There is nothing more dangerous than having nowadays citizens who are victims of fake news, of populism, manipulation, as we see all over Europe. This is a difficult battle, but we have to win it. And I'm saying this because recently the people who are in the hospitals today, some of them did not even believe that the virus existed. And they were exactly victims of such disinformation. So this is a bet that all societies have to handle, and we alike. Of course, we do have protection mechanisms for the vulnerable groups. We also run campaigns to inform people. We need to intensify these campaigns because from today onwards, things are changing. The weather is becoming colder and the winter is going to be more difficult for the physical and mental health of all groups and especially the vulnerable groups, the aged, the elderly, or the everyday people, the laypersons are at stake. We have seen everywhere that when societies are afraid of a second lockdown, they have started showing marks of fatigue accompanied by mental fatigue and psychological fatigue. And our society has to deal with this early on. We have made steps. We have provided pharmaceutical support coverage to the unsecured. We have provided special purpose measures, as Domna Michailidou is going to describe later on. I would just like to stress that in Europe today, there is no government whatsoever that does not try to tackle, to deal with the results of the pandemic, at the same time respecting the democratic rights. Some countries had more problems than us, like Turkey, for example, that had to close down its parliament. Only presidential decrees could be published. There was no legality control or audit ex ante or ex post. So we see this example and we understand that Turkey had the opportunity to keep in prison or imprison those who were against it. In the name of COVID, they also freed a lot of criminals that were in favor of the government. We have seen the same phenomenon in other countries, for example, Poland or Hungary, as Mr. Vavitsiotis said, and we have seen that these countries want to leave the Istanbul Treaty that covers the rights of women. So we understand that the winter is going to be a hard one. The protection of fundamental rights, the protection of human life during a pandemic is the most basic parameter for the political dialogue that we have to carry out. The point of reference here is Greece, under the presidency of which these issues have to be resolved. From the very first moment within the Council, we stressed the need to adjust to the new situation, to boost the specific rights as for the right to health, including mental health as well, safety at work, the right of the elderly in social insurance, by means of a series of actions and tools based on the European Rights Charter. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, today we are speaking about an issue that will stay with us for long. The nature of this pandemic and its measures, as for example, traffic constraints, lockdowns, locally or globally, all these are creating problems to society that we're trying to handle at the same time respecting the human rights. In Greece, these rights have been strengthened throughout the pandemic, and this is the way forward. We need to support vulnerable groups even further and step beyond any problems. Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister. Allow me at this point to say that at the end of this presidency, our country will have shown that it has been with the vulnerable groups throughout the pandemic, be it the homeless or the Roma populations or all other vulnerable groups. So throughout the crisis, Greece found itself in a situation where it had to stand for the rights of all these vulnerable groups, and that's what it did. We're giving now the floor to Mrs. Michailidou, Deputy Minister of Labour and Social Affairs. Thank you, dear ministers, dear friends. Mrs. Bakoyani, Mr. Varvitsiotis, we would like to welcome you in today's event in the framework of the Greek presidency of the Council of Europe. No matter what the difficulties that both ministers handle very bravely, I may say so. As we already said, this meeting has an agenda which is at the core, at the heart of the dialogues all over the world, COVID-19 and its impact on vulnerable groups. The pandemic is in all countries of the globe, and despite the efforts in the beginning, mainly of the pandemic, to diminish the threats of this pandemic, the truth is, as it can now be documented, that after the Spanish flu in the beginning of the 20th century, we are dealing with the biggest challenge, health challenge for the international communities. The second wave has already started, galloping all over the world and in Europe and even in Greece. All European countries are taking measures for the first COVID-19 winter, but we hope the last one. So within this landscape of threats everywhere, there is a positive light, which is our response as to this pandemic as humanity. The protection of human life, and especially the protection of vulnerable groups of people, has been a basic priority to the agenda, in the agenda of all countries. The economy and politics strengthened the concepts of public health, and the measures taken by most states were unprecedented. Of course, at the heart of such measures were the people who were characterized as vulnerable in many aspects. Apart from the hygienic conditions that the vulnerable groups face, they are exposed to the direct menace of the virus because due to the conditions of their living, for example, the homeless, those suffering low-income problems are more exposed to the outcomes of this pandemic. These are the main horizontal lines that go through the agenda of our today's meeting. We'll see the good and bad practices maybe, and during the discussion, I shall have the opportunity to speak about the specific measures in terms of our ministry, because I want to remind the citizens how much the state has tried to support the citizens. In brief, let me remind that we directly, automatically extended subsidies, allowances to vulnerable groups so that they do not congregate in public spaces. We have foreseen for new kinds of allowances for people with low incomes, people with families with children, families with handicapped persons, through the municipalities, directly or indirectly, with a lot of new legislation. The new law which is now under consultation will give the opportunity to homeless people to be categorized in groups that can receive some of these allowances. Also, women that have suffered family violence. Instead of these people being directed into public agencies, now they are going to be categorized as groups entitled to these specific allowances. This is one of the measures. We'll speak more lately. I would like to thank you all for being here, and I'm sure that our discussion today is going to be very fruitful for our vulnerable groups and for all social groups, for the mental health of all of us. Because these days are difficult and we have to provide a range of differentiated measures. Thank you. So we thank you, Mrs. Minister. So we would like to thank you, all ministers, and we are ready for the discussion. Concluding this addressing part of our meeting, let me say that the pandemic has shown that we are a welfare state and we have a rule of law that protects all citizens. We would like to thank Mrs. Bakoyanni that honors us by representing our country in the Council of Europe. Ms. Bakoyanni, thank you. I would like to thank all ministers for the ongoing work they do. Thank you, dear friends, and we are ready for our discussion after a very short break.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, καλημέρα σας.
Good morning. I'm Thanos Papanasiou, journalist at IRT. I'd like to welcome you at this event under the presidency of Council of Europe titled The Impact of COVID-19 Pandemic on Vulnerable Groups. The title of this thematic is COVID-19 and vulnerable groups of people. So I have the honor of presenting our dear guest experts on the issue, Mr. George Stamatis, Secretary General of Social Solidarity and Fight Against Poverty. Secretary General of Social Solidarity and Fight Against Poverty.
Τον κύριο Ιωάννη Δημητρακόπουλο.
Mr. Yannis Dimitrakopoulos, Scientific Advisor of European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, FRA.
Και την κυρία Μαρία
And Ms. Maria Gavunelli, President of the National Human Rights Committee, Professor of School, National Kapodistria University of Athens, School of Law. And Ms. Xenia Papastavru, Manager of OPECA, an organization of welfare benefits and social solidarity. We'll start with the presentation of Mr. Stamatis. So, topic is COVID-19 and vulnerable groups. Mr. Stamatis, I give you the floor. Mr. Papanasiou, I think you have left the channel of the interpretation somewhere on. It's active, so we can hear the double sound.
Αυτό που θα ήθελα...
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by talking about COVID-19 and vulnerable groups and say that fortunately for our country and ourselves, we were kind of prepared, apart from all the new data that resulted from all these conditions. We mainly care about protecting vulnerable groups and whatever entails. The truth of the matter is that due to the pandemic, we had to take all the necessary measures, but our first priority was initially to protect closed care units, either for disabled people or the chronically ill. So far, we see that during the first phase, we did not have any cases. The second thing that was important, what happens with people who are vulnerable due to their living conditions. Then we have two categories to distinguish. First, the homeless, and second, some Greek citizens of Roma origin. So what we said is that all these people who live in the street should find accommodation in in hostels or other camps. We had protocols drafted regarding to that, and as a result, people who used to live in the streets now live in hostels, in dormitories, and they're not there just to find accommodation and protection from COVID, but also with our intervention, all these people may be able to overcome some psychological impact from staying in the streets and try to be reintegrated. In our new bill of law, we have provided so that homeless citizens living in dormitories, etc., who do not take a minimum guaranteed income, at least they can have this minimum guaranteed income. This is huge assistance to them, and it allows us to give more opportunities to these people in order to be integrated back to society. Another part of a vulnerable population is the Roma population. What we've done as a ministry, quite successfully, I'd say, is to have some special subsidy to municipalities so that they could care about protection and information of Roma groups living in extreme poverty and in non-regular living conditions. The result is very important to us. We're a welfare state. We abide by the rule of law. And we did not have a state that would just intervene in order to rule certain things. We sat together side by side with these people, and though we are facing difficulties in making them understand some things that the rest of society comprehends, since these are people who have nothing to do with public health and the national health system, we needed to explain what the pandemic is, what it means, what its impact is, and then we tried to improve the employment conditions of these people who live in these closed camps. And one more thing, you know that we are now at a second phase. There are people who have the stigma of having had COVID disease. So we knew that we should not have any social automations regarding COVID, especially for such vulnerable groups as homeless and Roma. We managed, and we are improving now, lots of things that maybe we did not do as we should have, or that we have to enhance. We depended on guidelines of the European Commission and all authorities and agencies regarding human rights. In closing, I'd like to thank you for my participation in this meeting and tell you that Greece and civil society, the government, competent ministers, and although in the welfare state and rule of law have reached a very good point, and with the help of our fellow citizens in the second wave, we seem to be more organized and able to defend human rights, especially of the vulnerable groups. Thank you very much.
Κύριε Παπαθανασίου, το μικρόφωνο σας.
Your mic, Mr. Papathanasiou, if you can switch it on. And now the floor goes to Mr. Ioannis Dimitrakopoulos, Scientific Advisor for the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. See if you can switch it on.
Ναι.
And now the floor goes to Mr. Ioannis Dimitrakopoulos,
Yes.
Scientific Advisor for the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. See if you can switch it on.
Χαίρετε, καλημέρα σας και ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. The pandemic affected dramatically everyone and had a very negative impact on social inequalities.
Mr. Dimitrakopoulos, please. In Europe, our co-citizens, the Roma, try to keep the measures, while in some cases, we have seen that they have been accused for the number of cases of COVID. A comment from the interpreters: we can hear at least 6 voices at the same time, so if you please, only the speaker could use the microphone so that the others should be in mute mode. So the moderator now says that all speakers have to have their microphones muted and only the speaker has to have it on. So Mr. Papadimitriakopoulos continues. Some days ago, the Commission announced the new framework for the equality and participation of the Roma populations. So this framework of the European Commission refers to the need of measures in order to improve the conditions. There is a pause by the speaker. We are sorry. The interpreters are sorry. The pause is by the speaker. So this framework refers to the need to take measures in order to improve the conditions of life, the living conditions, and fight against any conflicts, any contradictions, and prejudice or biased response to these populations. For the best tackling of this pandemic, we need various measures related to digital integration, for example, or other types of integration, especially important for those living in settlements or under bad hygiene conditions. The Commission has taken a series of measures in order to protect the vulnerable groups, as the Roma is a vulnerable group. In Spain, for example, the central government provided electricity, running water, and gas in the Roma settlements. In Slovakia, we have seen big water tanks for these kind of settlements. In Greece, the government gave more than 2 million to municipalities for measures in order to avoid the expansion of COVID cases. Almost all authorities have taken measures, and the measures taken for the non-expansion of cases, especially local lockdowns, etc., do influence people with in different manners according to the characteristics of the person or the group, the conditions of living or working, etc. Also, men and women take the measures in a different manner. For example, responsibility within the household are burden different people in a different manner. Or young people or and the elderly have different responsibilities or burdens to comply with the measures. All those who live in restricted areas cannot easily keep social distance measures. Or students with access to the internet cannot keep up with the platforms if the connections are low, are weak. On the other hand, those who work in precarious forms of labor can lose their job, or those who work without contract do not have the possibility to be entitled to the allowances provided by the governments. The Commission publishes reports on the measures that national governments take within the European Union in order to handle the pandemic. At the end of September, the fifth report of the Commission focused on Roma. The report has specific paragraphs showing, or sections, showing the conditions, the living conditions of social exclusions that are negative in terms of measure taking. For example, local lockdowns have led to many Romas not being able to have an income, as many of them work as merchants by use of their car. And many times we see that Roma people cannot have contracted work, meaning that they are not entitled to any of the allowances that the government publishes. Also, the living conditions in the settlements cannot be connected on the internet, or they do not have computers whatsoever at all. So the children at these settlements cannot have access to any education whatsoever online. Thirdly, the basic lack in, the lack in basic infrastructure, mainly in congregated settlements, increases the threats, because under such circumstances, social distancing is not easily implemented. Running water is lacking in many cases, so hygiene measures cannot be taken. The World Health Organization has stressed repeatedly that running water, sewages, wastewater management, etc., are important in any case of health threats. So in the case of Roma settlements, we see a lot of problems, both in terms of hygiene and housing and education. Short-term measures cannot easily remedy these problems. However, we have seen indeed some initiatives to strengthen or to support these problems, along with the local initiatives taken by municipalities. We have seen in many countries that the institution of Roma moderator, intermediator, has covered a lot of problems because they have cooperated with the official authorities. So the message after these lessons is that we need to act locally so as to have more long-term results. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Dimitrakopoulos. Now the floor to Mrs. Maria Melli. Mrs. Gabunelli is president of the National Committee of Human Rights, a professor of the Law School of ECPA. We would like to thank you, Mr. Papathanasiou. I would like to thank the Greek presidency of the Council of Europe that gives us this opportunity for one more meeting, one more discussion that coincides with the dialogue that the Commission is holding on the issue nowadays. Today I'm going to speak about three things. The first is to explain what the National Committee for Human Rights is. It's an independent consulting advisory body to the state on human rights issues. At the same time, it is a bridge maker in between the administration, in other words, the state, and the civil society. We can do this because actually we are a multifaceted body. We have members that are drawn, if I may say so, from 41 different sections of the society: the civil society, organizations, employers, major organizations of companies. So we have a multitude of different characteristics. And these people carry with them the field experience and their expertise. This way, we can listen to the people, and we can also have an open channel to the administration, the government, so as to manage to ensure the best possible compliance with human right protection frameworks. The first thing that we did during the pandemic is to be there with the people for their human rights. Instead of holding 1 month meetings, as all the organizations do, we hold meetings once a week online, for example, of course, as all people do. And at the end of this period, we managed to draft a document of principles that should govern administration in such times. In simple words, the first principle says that the human rights still hold, especially throughout a crisis. The second principle is that any restricted measures which are necessary during a pandemic have to be based on a strong legal basis, be set in proportionality, and have time horizons. This is important in order to safeguard the values of a democratic society. I think that in the Greek democracy, in Greece, we have managed to do this, to achieve this after a lot of effort. Now, the second thing that we did, and we may focus on this a bit more, was to deal with specific vulnerable groups of the population. Already we mentioned the Roma groups, but let me now shed some light on to some other groups that still have massive needs of protection and support. For example, women and children victims of family violence. Many times we had cooperation with the General Secretariat for Equality in order to see whether these the measures taken did have a result. In LGBT groups also, we wanted to see whether the measures could give the outcome that was designed. A second sector were handicapped persons who suffer a lot of problems throughout such critical times. They cannot access the health services or any other services, and they cannot access the administrative services that are necessary for their daily life. At this moment, let me say that we were very happy to see that digital services were dramatically increased throughout the pandemic, but it is understood that these needs are continuous and very intense. So the effort has to be expanded. We are very happy to see that there is a national plan for the handicapped underway. The National Committee has been invited to take part in the drafting of such a framework, and we're very happy to contribute with our comments and observations for this plan. A third sector with many problematic cases and a lot of suffering are the immigrants and refugees. The structures are now closed. There are specific provisions and processes. The committee expressed its concern on the fact that many of the restrictions imposed on such structures might be beyond the proportionality rule. We have collected all our observations and comments regarding how the state has dealt with the refugee and immigrant structures. And we have drafted a long report that is going to be published next week. First, it's going to be, of course, notified to the Prime Minister, the President of the Republic, and all the competent ministers and commissioners. The Deputy President, the Deputy Head of the Committee, and of the Head of the Internal Affairs. The last observation on our behalf, and I will conclude after this, regards the prisoners. Well, this was the not so good practice that we have shown. I hope that they were lucky, but luck is sometimes the result of care. Nevertheless, we were lucky enough not to have high numbers of cases in the prisons. At this point, we had the least response by the state as to what is going on really within the prisons. And I would like to keep this as a question mark, keep this question mark. Our committees will continue monitoring the processes. As a conclusion, based on our experience until today, I can say the following. During the pandemic, we intensified whatever we used to do in the past. The new thing that we started doing throughout the pandemic and will continue doing, this is our repository, in other words, regards the manner through which we monitor and intervene. I think that the great lesson that we all took throughout this period regarded the importance, the significance of the protection structures, the significance of the protective provisions. Until today, these were matters of theory. Now, throughout the crisis, in the difficult times we go through, we see that human lives depend on such structures, and we as a committee will continue protecting them. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Gavouneli. Now, Mrs. Xenia Papastavrou, Head of OPECA, regarding the allowances and social solidarity allowances.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The foundations and framework of social care and solidarity are based on the Constitution, which stipulates that the state cares for the health of citizens, taking special measures for the youth, the elderly, the disabled, to protect and care for those who do not have the means, and for all citizens in order to live decently through a guaranteed minimum income. So OPECA, under its capacity as a unified organization for subsidies and benefits, implements what the Constitution provides. The tools for OPECA to this end is benefits and financial aids provided and originating by the state budget in order to support many social groups for 2020. OPECA budget was over 3 billion, and it supports over 1.5 million people. But OPECA is not functioning in a static environment under the supervision of the Ministry of Labor. Tries to find solutions in real time in order to respond to the real needs of the citizens as they are formed in this uncertain era. For example, we have the pandemic of the coronavirus. OPECA services, though understaffed, had the reflexes to adapt the operation of the organization in order to make it respond to the needs of the citizens. And let me illustrate that with certain examples from the initiatives that we took in this astonishing times we're living in this pandemic. So in the epicenter, we have the citizens. We are at the service of the citizens. We have to be flexible in serving them, informing them, making citizens aware of the services of OPECA. This is the ulterior objective of my administration. We want to make sure that measures and the pandemic will not inhibit access to the citizens, to OPECA by the citizens. During the lockdown, we understood that disabled people and the elderly could not go to our services in order to apply for a benefit. Their right is founded since the moment they apply. In order to have a complete and integrated electronic service, it would take a lot of time. So we created an e-form so that elderly and disabled people should not have to wait for these measures to be lifted in order to apply. This was very useful to all citizens, and hundreds of people filled in the form we had on our side. We also accepted calls. We mostly deal in OPECA with vulnerable groups, so access to information and quick service without their physical presence was and still is of utmost importance. We understood that we had to respond quickly, but differently, since we had no infrastructure. This is why we subcontracted a company, and very quickly we were able to create a modern call center for national coverage, working from 8 to 7 in the evening, Monday to Friday, in order to facilitate citizens. OPECA, from May 2020 to the present date, has served successfully over 73,000 calls from all over Greece. Now, school meals, another example. We worked a lot in order to expand the school meals program of 19 and 20. We wanted to make sure the distribution of school meals will start earlier for the school year 2020-2021. We were successful in doing that. This is why school meals are distributed from the very first day of the opening of schools. Third example, for mountainous area, we had to provide a benefit for the vulnerable groups. In March 10th, 2020, and in cooperation with the Ministry of E-Governance, we installed an electronic application for all applications to be done for the next years. This is under process still. We are preparing. Then we have a YEFIRA program, bridge, for all those people who borrowed, who are under mortgage, and now they can pay back through our organization by financial support, even up to 90% of their monthly installment. Now, OPECA is in charge to help and support vulnerable groups of people. So we are alert, vigilant, and every day we find ways to accomplish our objectives and function effectively. Of course, we do wish for this pandemic to end very soon. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Papastavrou. I would like to thank all the speakers, each one separately. They have given us many data from their expertise. I would like to ask a question. I don't know if Mr. Stamatis or somebody else would like to answer. This pandemic contributes, or no, let me rephrase, as a result of this pandemic, vulnerable groups are affected the most. Mr. Stamati, are there any other models of other European countries? Do you cooperate with other EU countries in order to see how they face issues regarding vulnerable groups, especially nowadays, you know, due to the pandemic? Thank you for the question. You understand that each EU country has its own model, whether that is for disabled people or Roma or the elderly. And the truth of the matter is that seeking for good models, we could not find models that enthused us that much. So as a result, we have a very good management and very good local administration. So we developed our own plan, Greek plan. As Mr. Dimitrakopoulos said, we had this extraordinary budget in order to support the Roma, for example. We reinforced this group, and with regard to the homeless, we reinforced more infrastructures in order to give accommodation to these people. There was a model of England for homeless people where they were all accommodated in hotels, and now they try to see what will happen, how they can take them out and what will happen with them. We didn't want to go into this. We wanted to find ways of integration of these people and to closed structures for the chronically ill or the disabled. What we tried to do is to support the parents or accompanying people, because there's a process still valid without any visiting hours in order to prevent the dissemination of the virus. This means that Greece develops its own models because it has its own administration, and I have to say that we're pretty organized as a state when it comes to that. Thank you. You gave me some examples of cooperation with the local government, and in one of our next topics, I think we will discuss with local governors about how they face issues with regard to homeless people and their accommodation now in this COVID era. I think that we just finished with the discussion of this first session, this first thematic about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on vulnerable groups. I would like to thank you.
Λοιπόν, καλησπέρα σε όλους. Συνεχίζουμε.
Good evening. So we go ahead with our title, The Impact of COVID-19 Pandemic on Vulnerable Groups. The thematic in this second session is child protection under crisis condition. Very important speakers, Ms. Domna Maria Michailidou, Deputy Minister of Labour and Social Affairs, Luciano Celestini, representative of UNICEF in Greece, George Nikolaidis, former president of Lanzarote Committee of European Council, head of the Department of Mental Health and Social Welfare of the Institute of Child Health and Psychiatrist, and Ms. Theoni Koufo-Nikolakou, Deputy Ombudsman for the Children's Rights. It is certain that in this very different, unprecedented situation, we were tested, as well as the resilience of social systems was tested, and all those feelings of fears and anxiety that were caused, and all the concern about children's rights protection, the continuance of educational process, families, children who have disabilities or some illness or are abandoned or neglected. Children protection is a priority, and since the pandemic also affects the economy, it increases inequalities, so we must put some emphasis in taking all the necessary measures to protect children, their rights from poverty, as well as to create the proper conditions for a child to be raised. I'll give the floor right away to the Deputy Minister of Labour, Ms. Dr. Domna Maria Michailidou, who's done a lot of work even before, but also throughout this period of the pandemic. You also showed us all the new problems that resulted and also provided some answers. I will give you the floor to begin. Thank you very much, Katerina. Thank you, Ms. Panagopoulou. Thank you for being here. Mr. Nikolaidis, Ms. Koufo-Nikolakou, Mr. Calestini Luciano. I will try to speak in Greek. Thank you very much for being here. I can say very honestly, I would like to thank all my friends for being here, because all the efforts that we've done as a ministry, well, we've done it all together. Institutionally speaking, we're all stakeholders of all the issues that preoccupied us before and during the pandemic, and maybe even after that. In December 2019, we were able to announce the beginning of the procedures for the new framework for fostering and adopting children. In July, we were able to complete all that and start with the deinstitutionalization of the children. So for several months, we already have some experience about how we better protect vulnerable groups of people, especially children, whether they are under care units for children or are extremely vulnerable due to some disability, or children who receive school meals due to living in areas that are affected by poverty. So on one hand, we tried all these months, and we keep trying to be present in this increased protection which is required for vulnerable groups, especially children. And on the other hand, we were able to bring into the foreseen policies that were somewhere in the closet, policies that were in the right direction, that we all acknowledged that should be completed, And due to many factors, especially during the difficult months of the lockdown, we were locked in our offices without meeting anybody, without visiting anybody, without receiving any visits or anything. So we were just there working hard in order to run certain procedures. So from the very first moment, as a ministry, we mobilized and we took all the necessary measures to protect all the vulnerable groups of people, especially children. I believe that you all know, and I believe that all of us in this electronic panel, we know that the project we undertook was not an easy one, right? Because it was not unidimensional. So in such conditions of this unprecedented health concerns, we were very much preoccupied about vulnerable groups, especially children. Due to the pandemic, we have many more issues involved, and when it comes to younger people, there are different and diverse issues where the state must show that it cares. Whether that is their social care, their access to creative doings, and most especially their protection from poverty and social exclusion as a result of the terrible financial effects of this pandemic. Children throughout these months must not lose their childhood, and on the other hand, we must make sure that socially and financially we can support them. So that, for us in the ministry, were a very complex challenge, side by side to our permanent concern of public health. This was a common experience with other European countries, as I've seen by speaking with other colleagues from other EU governments. So what we did was the following. I thought that other member states that during the first wave had much more difficult times compared to Greece, with many cases and lots of losses in closed care units. Well, I thought they would show us what to do in order to prepare ourselves. Speaking with ambassadors and other authorities in EU countries, I know that we were assisted in adopting the most vigorous and rigid measures, especially for the closed institutions, but also for the open ones. We ensure the smooth and uninterrupted operation of all these units, nurseries, old age homes, etc. Everybody knows the great concern and stress when having children or elderly or dear fellow citizens in such structures, even schools. So the stake was dual. On one hand, we would have to take care and protect the health of children, elderly, and their families, and on the other hand, we had to keep the uninterrupted operation of nurseries, kindergarten, etc. They had to stay in this creative environment. We could not deprive them of their childhood, and we did not do that. On the contrary, in close cooperation with experts of the Ministry of Health, I think that we managed to keep them going uninterruptedly, but also observing the protection of their health. So by upkeeping strict measures, now kindergartens, nurseries are still functioning safely. We also tried to ensure their creative environment. even for these younger ages. We even tried to have vouchers. I think we were able to have more vouchers than any other season. We allocated about 30 million euros for the budget because we wanted the children to be in a protected environment, organization-wise, but also health-wise, especially in these conditions of the pandemic. We were extra careful when it comes to children with disabilities. We wanted all the structures to keep working safely. Their operation is to the benefit of families and of their children. I'm talking about daily care centers as well as other supported hostels, etc. We gave special measures and guidelines for the staff of these structures. And in our Bill of Law, we have ensured the funding of 100% for those months where the ministry said that we had to have 50% of the capacity of these structures. So for these units where they could even spend the night, we took important measures, always with the assistance of our scientists and the way that they guided us. We tried to increase even the capacities of these centers, and in our Bill of Law, we reinstate their funding. We did that because we need to have sustainable jobs and sustainable structures for our fellow citizens with disabilities. This is one of our priorities. Now, in this second phase of the pandemic, knowing more about the virus, we have full capacity of all our structures since experts told us that if we take special measures, then this can be done safely. We talked with Ms. Bakoyani, with Mr. Varvitsiotis, and apparently the psychological and social support of these citizens was very important, especially during the lockdown. And now that we're talking about social distancing, we are looking with these services, consultation services, to have some kind of closeness, of affection. I can share with you that all our welfare centers in all geographical zones of Greece have launched programs for their users, for children with disabilities, so that during the lockdowns and even now with the social distances, children can find new programs, maybe learning how to eat properly or to do some, physical education projects, focusing on all the sensory and motory functions of the children. We try to help them and support them. Funding or giving some financial help and support to such families and vulnerable groups is very important. Of course, the pandemic made families and family plans and financial planning of the families being totally out of scope. We tried to help the most vulnerable people, those who had children and who were users and who could benefit of the minimum guaranteed income. So during the lockdown and in cooperation with the municipalities, we also asked to help at home, to offer them food through the European Fund for those who do not have any guaranteed income. And we tried to give special support to all those who receive the guaranteed minimum income and have children. As a state, we ensured for children this feeling of safety and certainty. It's very important for them to understand, although what is happening, that they can still be safe. And the organized state of adults must function for all the children, not as parent, but with a criterion of parental responsibility. This is important in order to have a safe environment, an environment of certainty for these children. We need to keep all special structures, kindergartens, nurseries open. We need to keep upgrading our services in order to give this feeling of safe sociability. We develop synergies all the time, cooperations with independent authorities, with stakeholders, different agencies. I would like to thank UNICEF also, because there is a special cooperation when it comes to disinstitutionalization. They've helped us a lot in order to develop fostering as an institution. So the basic right, the fundamental right to the child for its childhood and for the family can be realized. I think that the sky is the limit, so we can do even more. I think I will stop talking. I know I talk a lot. I would like to thank you all for your participation, but most especially for your cooperation and actions, because they've helped us a great deal throughout this month. So thank you very much. Your microphone, please. Okay, I don't know if you can hear me now. Good. I would like to thank you very much. Apart from all the actions that you mentioned during the pandemic, that are very important. I liked what you said, that we must care not to lose this right to childhood. I liked the way that you said it, that you expressed it, and for doing it, of course.
Of UNICEF in Greece. It's a great honor that you are here with us today. We'd like you to tell us how vulnerable children were affected during COVID, poor children. You may have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Minister and colleagues, and really thanks for the invitation. I feel very honored to be with you all. I'm not quite sure what I can tell you all, a team of experts that you don't already know, but I will try. And just to mention, Domna, apologies, the interpreter and you were both coming out at the same time, so I was struggling to pick up, but I think I got the gist of what you were saying. I mean, maybe just to first mention, and I jumped off a call with many of my own colleagues. We're having our half-yearly regional meeting. There were 24 countries on, and they are still going, and I will join them once this finishes. The bottom line is that we are all struggling. The scale of this crisis, even in the 70+ years of UNICEF's history, it's the first time we're meeting such challenges. I'm not sure we're completely succeeding. Also, if I can be very honest, so it's just so unprecedented, and it's happening everywhere, all at the same time, to a scale that our systems, your systems and our systems, let's say, are struggling to cope. I mean, if you look at the few statistics that we are already gathering. I mean, there's some things we know and there's some things we don't know. But if you look at just the loss of work, there's been an estimation that 400 million full-time jobs have been lost since this crisis began globally. And the most affected by those job losses are young people and women. and most often those in casual work or in the informal sector that don't have the protection of institutions around them to buffer the blow. If you look at poverty in our region, and by ours I mean UNICEF's region, which stretches from Italy to Central Asia, so across those a couple of dozen countries, we expect a 44% increase in child poverty across that region just by the end of the year. And that doesn't even consider what is to come, because possibly in some of these countries, the worst is still to come. I'm sitting now in the UK, and apologies for the casual wear because I completely forgot to pack a shirt. So I'm sitting in our spare bedroom with my t-shirt on. Note to self to keep an emergency shirt in the wardrobe. But here, even in a country with such well-developed systems, the debate daily is raging about what to do, both how to control the pandemic, but also what obligations the social sector has to protect the rights of the most vulnerable. So these challenges are just everywhere, all at once. I was looking at the latest IMF projections. I'm sure you've seen them just as much as I have, but they're currently estimating a contraction of almost 4.5% global growth by the end of the year. And I think their projections for Greece are somewhere between 9 and 10%, which you would all be far better acquainted with than me. So yeah, I mean, I wish we could say we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I think we're still deep in the middle of the tunnel right now, and yeah, we can hope for the best, but I think we need to prepare for the worst. I mean, if we look at what happened during the global financial crisis of 10, 12 years ago, we see consequences that I think we would do very well to do everything in our power to avoid. And yes, it's true that governments around the world have rolled out stimulus packages to minimize or mitigate the effects of this pandemic on the poor, and particularly on children. And at the time, I think we thought these packages were massive and unprecedented. And then they sort of have, at least to my mind, receded into the distance as this thing has rolled on and on. And again, I'm not sure that our systems are able to step up to a sustained, protracted level of massive support to those most affected. So, I mean, the impacts of this crisis, and if we're not able to step up and at least partly fill these gaps, is going to harm all children, that's for sure. But what is equally true is that it will not harm all children the same. And it will be always those that are already left behind who will pay the highest price. That's children with disabilities, children from marginalized populations, children from migrant backgrounds, children living in institutions, children living on the streets, all of those children that all of our jobs revolve around every day. I see Mr. Stamatis there, where he has all those cases, in his portfolio, and they are the ones also that are so often left out of national statistics and the ones that are sort of hidden. So the criticality of investing in continual evidence generation so we can make the case is going to be essential if we are to keep sort of evolving our understanding of the ongoing impact as the months go on. And then, I mean, perhaps just to flip it, again, looking back at these sort of more, well, at the time they were huge, but let's say more modest experiences of the past, we know the good news is that if we do find a way to ensure that these investments on children are protected, that we don't go backwards. That poverty figure I mentioned before, by the way, the 44%, that, if true, that will wipe out 20 years of poverty gains in one go, in a few months' time. So we can mitigate if we bite the collective bullet and we find ways to invest. And I think the minister, and again, I couldn't hear properly, was going through some examples of how the ministry have done that. And I think we need to take those examples and multiply them by 100. And we know that when children are invested in, that we can minimize those impacts over time. We know that we can reduce impacts in health, in nutrition, in education. Violence is one of those subjects that is talked about more and more in terms of the impact of lockdowns and these kinds of restricted movements and what happens inside the home. And as I said, the investment, the return on investment is already well documented. COVID aside, we know how investments in early childhood education can set children and families up for a more stable and prosperous future. We know the value of vaccines, and I'm not talking even about COVID-19 vaccines. I mean just vaccines in terms of a return on societies. I think there's one study that shows a 17-to-1 return on investment. We know the investments made in nutrition and how they can produce 10, 20 times the economic and social dividends compared to what's spent on them. So I think the principles are there and they're tested. The challenge for us is now to find the resources to stopgap the economic impact. And maybe to close, I mean, to my mind, I think there are three, going from small and then ending in two big ones. I mean, we're thrilled to be working with MOSA on the child guarantee. That's the first thing to say. And at the moment, it's a, I would say, relatively modest effort, but I think it's one that if we're smart and if we use it to demonstrate a best practice, I think it can exponentially grow and show others in the EU what success can look like. And I'm an absolute believer in this as something that we can use strategically to lead by example. So we're really excited as UNICEF to push that partnership as far as we possibly can together and demonstrate to the other member states that we're not playing catch up. We're actually we're leading by doing and by learning as we go. That's the small. The other pillar I want to stress, and I'm not sure how we can be of help, but we're ready, is that I was looking at some of the envelopes that are being talked about, and I'm sure you're all extremely engaged in this already, that'll be coming through Brussels in the next 7 years. I mean, there's the new MFF, but then if you look at the other two big envelopes that at least I'm aware of that are COVID related, if you add all those up, we're looking at around 2.4 trillion euro that will be available to member states. Some of it is COVID related, about half, let's say, and half is the 1.1 trillion, which is coming through the new 7-year cycle. If there's a way that we can make the case to ensure that children are not just left behind in that and not just represented proportionally, but disproportionately represented in those financial flows to Greece. We are very happy to work with anyone on this call and anyone not on this call to make the case as strong as we can so that the 2 million children in Greece, including the 1 in 3 who are either already poor or at risk of being poor, have the best possible chance. But then I want to also raise a third opportunity that in my short time in Greece, I've only been there a few months in Athens, is one that I don't see much evidence that we've really tried to exploit. And that is what partnerships beyond simply government institutions are able to do. I think there's, in my experience, there's almost a default that government has to fix this, and usually by itself. And I think this is too big for any single institution or any international organization to do just in isolation. So for me, if there's anything that I would like to work with all of you on in the future, is the value of partnerships, not just partnering with civil society and in genuine community engagement, which in the sort of discourse in Greece, I just don't see that very much. I don't hear it talked about very much. But also there's an incredibly rich private sector ecosystem in Greece that we, at least I hear most of it in the context of foundations, like the Stavros Niarchos Foundation and Onassis and these kinds. And I'm not sure, however, if we've really seen how we can triangulate all of the resources that are within their hands and all of our, let's say, institutional efforts, but also how we can ensure that mothers and fathers and children themselves, along with their civil society representatives, can all come together. Because my very unscientific opinion in all of this, and this will be my last point, is that it's that togetherness that will ensure that we're able to both identify and respond to needs. And I know in so many countries around the world, these kinds of shortcomings and gaps end up being blame games with everybody pointing fingers at everybody else. And I think now is the time, if we can demonstrate in Greece that we have used this to actually join up different constituencies and work together towards one common objective, which is the well-being of children. Again, I think we have an opportunity to lead by example, because certainly, as I mentioned before, I don't think any single actor, no matter how large, including government, is going to be able to pull this off without a fully joined up effort. So perhaps I will stop there. And again, thanks for allowing me to be part of this conversation. And I will be back to Greece next week, and maybe we can take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you can hear me. Δεν ξέρω αν με ακούτε. Okay. Σας ευχαριστούμε.
So thank you very much. What you said was very important, that all children are influenced, not only the vulnerable ones. This crisis is going to have an impact on all children, not alike, of course, but it is important that funding will be given to frameworks for children, and rights for children have to be supported. Also, he said something about the tunnel. He said that there's no light yet, but nevertheless, we might be close to the end of the tunnel. We hope we are. Nevertheless, I'm going to give the floor now to Mr. Giorgos Nikolaidis of the Lanzarote Council of Europe, head of Mental Health and Social Welfare Commission, psychiatrist. We said a lot. We spoke about the violence in families or the way that the children feel.
Thank you very much. The truth of the matter is that the income of such conditions on children is a bit ironic, because they're mostly impacted by the way that society reacts than the pandemic itself. So I think that the results must be managed. There will be rivalries between fellow citizens, and we'll have to manage these problems for a great deal of time. I think that awareness of COVID-19 to children is not that big. Apparently, this virus does not kill young children, so they're not that much affected. However, on the other hand, This pandemic entails too many biological and psychological effects. In Geneva, UNICEF office says that hundreds of children will die of undernourishment these years because of closed schools and because they totally depend on school meals. If you can imagine that for the 21st century and our global civilization, it means something. And although in the developed world, we only talk about the underdeveloped countries, there are many children around the world that depend on school meals for rudimentary, for basic food throughout the day, even in the developed world. From the participation of various services, it depends whether especially vulnerable children in our country, the developed or underdeveloped world, can have access to health services. If the national vaccination program advances, or if certain tests for children take place. Some of these programs and services during the lockdown did not occur. It was said that we need to have a social perspective. If the schools are closed, even if we keep with online education, we cannot ensure equal access of all children. There are still social inequalities, financial inequalities. There are some children that without education cannot have a better life for themselves. During the lockdown, as a former president and as the president of Lanzarote Committee of the European Council said, there was a declaration lodged with regard to the victimization of children when there is violence at home. It means that 24 hours 7, you're under full control of the perpetrator of violence. And throughout Europe, we see that there are many mentions of violence. However, for children, we have no data, because how can they report any violence if they cannot be outside of the home and report it to somebody? So we see that after the lockdown, there is an increase of such reports. In many European countries, we discuss over again a partial lockdown. These children that during springtime exited, let's say, this state of victimization will go back to it because they believe, they know that they might be again under full control of the perpetrator for who knows how much time. With Interpol and the data that we've had, children use online services a lot for socialization, for amusement, but this makes them victims to people who wanted to have access to these children by using digital means and social media. On children, we see that there is a psychological violence which is exercised. We may see the other child or the other adult as a potential lethal weapon that threatens us. And if we think of ourselves as children as potential weapons, because we may carry a virus and we may kill our grandparents or people that we love because they're vulnerable health-wise. So these forces, these relations will manifest various dimensions of mental health. It was also said that these measures cause also a social and financial crisis, and we know that for the last 10 years in our countries there is a footprint of such a financial and social crisis. We have many people suffering from many mental diseases after 10 years of financial crisis. In Greece, we've lost about 26 or 27 of our GDP, and today, in 1 year only, we will lose about 1/10 of it. So you understand that the impact, apart from the financial side, will also have social, psychological, and mental effects. We are paying double and triple the price of this condition when we look at all the children or vulnerable groups inside structures and closed units. What if this virus was like H1N1? If you remember, most people dying were people in old age homes and in closed structures. Imagine if children were affected by this virus as well. However, children are in a way prisoners. And we also have children prisoners, refugees, immigrants. They live in our countries. They live under great limitations. Children with disability, children living in the streets, all the categories of children that were vulnerable before, they're even more vulnerable nowadays. We should do certain things about that. We called upon all states not to let social services, child welfare services leave such services behind or get lost into other services, because states tended to give all their funding to medical technologies. We should go on investing on child protection services as well. It's not something secondary. It's not a resource to society. It's something that can bear fruit. Then for families and children, especially in cases of lockdown, partial lockdown, whatever, we cannot expect social services users to come to us for help. We must make available our help and support in our daily contact with school communities. School communities must go back into this game so that children may learn how to use them. We also need to ensure through our policies that no vulnerable category of children will be left behind. We must make sure that we do not forget anybody. We must take some courageous, urgent measures for institutionalizing institutions, closed units. all these months in Greece, I hear a lot of things being said. Some of them are right, some of them are wrong. But we do not have a very big old age homes. We should have some emergency program for emergency fostering of the elderly, for example. Same for children with disabilities, because they are children, but a disability or some disabilities make these children especially vulnerable. We also need expert services and the perception that on the medium run we must enhance the system. We must enable the system so that these children who are victimized, marginalized, vulnerable, we must stop giving them substitutes of support. We must provide them a regular service that they are worth having, as if they were children of a rich family that could buy such a service on the market. We need to ensure their education, social protection, and health. We need better mechanisms to collect data and monitor the situation in order to be able to say in a documented way which are the policies that bear fruit and which don't. In some countries we may have better data or not. But in Greece, although we have systems available, we're kind of lagging behind when it comes to the collection of data. In reality, the situation is very crucial. The resources have to be documented, because you can only bear results if you have a constant collection of data that can show that a measure taken performs good or not. In closing, I'd like to say something that has been repeated so many times these months. Everything that we say now could have been said even before COVID-19 pandemic about all the vulnerable groups. In reality, for all societies, developed or underdeveloped, this pandemic showed which are the basic children's rights that we didn't take care of even before COVID-19. This is a challenge in which we enter, and we need to respond to, because children are the biggest resource of our society. They are the social capital of our future. Thank you. Exactly. And this is the capital that we need to protect. I would like to thank you for your discourse. We are greatly concerned of this footprint on the souls of the children. This footprint will be engraved for many years to come. And the work of Ms. Michailidou and of the ministry is very important in order to minimize impact, especially for very vulnerable groups of children. I'll go now to Ms. Theonikou Fonikolakou, Deputy Ombudsman for the Children's Rights. During the pandemic, how did the rights of children were impacted? We talk about children's rights a great deal, but without really defining them. So how much this parameter changed?
This is a good question indeed, because we need to define rights. You're right. We would like to thank for the invitation. Let me say that the Ombudsman has already based its experience on the reports that it receives throughout this time and the interventions made for streamlining our framework with the international good practice frameworks. And that's where we have to start from: the international charters for children's rights, the roadmaps set our in situ investigations at the hotspots, the homes, the institutions, and the dialogues with with the Council of Adolescents or competent bodies, schools, etc. I'm not going to describe the competencies of this specific ministry or directorate, but I would like to speak about the overall situation that was formulated after the imposition of restrictive measures, because it is not the COVID itself, but the restrictive measures that led to various violations of the children's rights, no matter how necessary that might have been. As regards child protection, we don't speak about, we don't speak from scratch or from, or we don't speak about a very well structured system. Actually, it's not a system at all. It is a situation without a core mechanism or strategy to handle, to manage the cases, or even to map, to record the situation. In other words, the state does not know exactly what is the situation and what are the instruments in place. Second, we have a lot of one-off projects, a lot of initiatives, and in order to introduce the European Commission to this, the funding of some of such projects are a bit cloudy. Very different general directorates provide funding for this kind of initiatives, but there is no central channel. Third, there is no reporting about the costs of such interventions, neither for children nor for the immigrants and refugees. And there is no horizontal budgetary line for children. In various countries where there is long-term planning for children, it is very positive to have budgets with an appropriation for children. But nevertheless, even if these were in place, the time is too short so that funding might reach the beneficiaries. Also, there is no provision for the training of the in situ operators, of the people who work in the field of social protection. And as already said before, there are no protocols to train the children in their rights from early ages so that they can understand which are the violations of their rights. So this that I just described is the so-called system that we have, according to which we try to handle the unprecedented COVID situation. We have never taken any report about what happened with these children. We heard that the education system operated, that it reached the households. We heard that especially during the first stage of the COVID, we had a lot of images of children that were happy at home because they didn't have to go to school. We saw some viral videos with happy children's faces. So we could not in the beginning understand which were the serious consequences on the mental and psychic condition of the child that has to stay at home. Now, as regards family violence, when children have to coexist with the abusers at home, we can say that we had double number of calls. We received a double number of calls, but only 10% regarded children. This can show us that, first, statistics regarding children cannot reflect reality because it was the victims that that called us, but the children do not have frequent access to telephone or to a line, a hotline like ours. And second, that the only statistics that we have in our country are the ones we have from these reports. But these are not adequate statistics. We do not have any classification whatsoever of the family violence against children. We do not have additional data related to the quality data related to the progress of the case, its handling, etc. So we cannot have a good idea of what is happening and how we can respond. Indeed, as mentioned, children will very rarely seek for assistance in case of violations. They wait for us to recognize the violence. This means that the operators have to be trained enough so as early on understand which are the indications of abuse. And of course, the children have to be aware of what their rights are and understand whether they are violated or not. For example, there is no protocol of sexual harassment. There is no protocol of sexual education. So kids don't know whether their rights are violated or not. This would tackle stereotypes, sexual abuse, and other problems. In Sweden, they have such a protocol since 1940s, and after the 50s, there are radio shows training children about their rights. In Greece, we don't have any. The second sector where we saw violations were the hotspots. Both accompanied children and the others were trapped. That's what they felt. They were never given explanations as regards the characteristics of the situation in simple language. Any initiatives were fragmentary, so not enough and adequate for the children, and that's why children expressed their anxiety. The network of European ombudsmen, where we participate, focused on the concern that children don't have basic rights, good housing, running water, education. Many children also have to struggle with mental health issues, which are stemming out from the restriction measures. As regards medical health and healthcare, Greece did not have very good response for immigrants or refugees because we had the card issue, and only the children that had been recorded as asylum seekers would get this card and be entitled to medical treatment or outpatient care or health care. The others did not have adequate care, apart from hospitalizations whenever necessary. As Mr. Nikolaidis said, and as the Minister said, we also see that the institutions and foundations and shelters and dormitories of unaccompanied children have had the similar characteristics throughout the crisis. We saw that social life was blocked. School was stopped without explanations that were adequate for these children. There were no options for informal or non-formal training. And also we had many cases of psychiatric cases within dormitories and guest houses. We also had the detention centers that were not called detention, for example, but, of course, but they were called protection centers. So the restriction time was extended. For example, they would be kept in the police, at the police station until the COVID test would come out, for example. So the ombudsman intervened and asked to prioritize COVID tests to children, and the system responded after a while. At prisons, all activities were shut down. Despite our interventions, we saw that no alternative teaching methods were implemented, or entertaining methods, or informal training manners, or sessions with a psychologist, so that the children could feel that they can handle things and they can manage their time. And finally, let me say that as regards social services and mental health, we have the same observations as Mr. Nikolaidis. Our additional concern is the following. Social services, apart from the support to the families, they also need to diagnose neglect. And we saw that they could not operate in a similar manner all over Greece. Even in the cases of abuse, we couldn't have the response of social services, or the contact with the child was not sustained. And the result was that some children that did have mental health or psychological health problems could not have any way out. The positive aspect in this situation is to exploit our experience so as to create a well-structured system for children's protection. As Mr. Calestini also mentioned, we need to find the space, thinking out of the box, to build a sustainable, a viable child protection system. The investment to take should aim at a system that will have the characteristics to make it sustainable after 10, 15 years. The other thing to say was that the negative aspect would be to use the funding that will be given, we'll see in what kind of forms, and in a fragmentary manner. This will lead us to the same situation as we are now. In other words, no walls around our protective field. Thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to thank you all. Thank you, Mrs. Koufonikolakou. It was very interesting that you mentioned the failures of the current system. As you mentioned, children very rarely ask for access themselves. So it is us that need to acknowledge this problem and give them the access. I would like to thank you all, Mrs. Koufonikolakou, Mr. Nikolaidis, Mr. Calestini, and Mrs. Michailidou. One last comment. I can hear the comments of all the speakers, and I do understand that I represent the state, but we want to become creative in order to be sure that the services reach the beneficiaries. due to practical reasons, it is understood that the beneficiaries being the children, they cannot have access to reporting channels. But hearing Mrs. Koufanikolakou, I think that we live in different countries. Let me remind you the following. During the lockdown, we had an organization and we had our reasons, specific reasons, so that the society and the economy and, of course, labor had to be protected. So we managed to offer to the vulnerable groups a relevant, normality, no matter the difficulties that all countries faced in the developed countries. So we managed to promote some policies of deinstitutionalizations. Of course, we need more holistic schemes and systems, but let me say that if we act strategically, we might lose local practice. I'm sure that you're not mentioning the work of our ministry, but I think that we have managed, for the first time after many years, to be proud as a country, having reached this relevant normality in the daily life of people, in case of creative education and entertainment of children, for example. Of course, we need to do more, but in our country, we have not done so badly. A short answer, so that we don't have any misunderstandings. Of course, the state has worked this way. We do understand and we do recognize this. But in order to see that I'm not only speaking about the holistic system. In some cases of some organizations, until the certification scheme that you introduced, it is difficult that we understand to understand what has happened in between. So deinstitutionalization is a long-term request. It is true that you have to deal with the problems of many, many years, and I do recognize that you have done a lot of work. One last word to agree with the previous speakers. Certainly, the task at hand is serious, and we need the state, we need the civil society, and the scientists and the private sector. We all need to agree that children have to be protected. And also, the government should not be just one minister, but all the co-competent bodies within the administration. It's not just the ministry. We have a lot of structures within the administration. So, Mr. Calestini, would you like to say something last?
How can I possibly follow? No, just to say that we're with you all, and again, just to stress that this is something that we've never been tested to this extent before, and we're going to have to try many new things, and some of them will fail and some of them will succeed. But again, I come back to this idea that no matter how well-resourced and progressive thinking a government is, it has to require a vast range of partnerships coming together. And if there's a role that UNICEF can play in convening those partners, because often that's a value that we can add, then we're ready to do so. And I mean, my last word, let me just mute. Sorry, my speakers are going funny. Just to say that, I mean, as I said, I'm sitting here in the UK. And how Greece has done so far has been nothing short of extraordinary. Yeah, I mean, you look at the numbers and then you look at everybody else's numbers and it's amazing. I think the test for us will be to understand, even if the last case is tomorrow, the impacts are going to be felt. And we don't really, I think nobody can say how long those impacts will last and how deep they will go. So this whole idea also of evidence gathering together and building that case and showing what the return on investment would be, so that we don't take this counterintuitive approach of investing in children last because we need to look after the big important things first. Rather, we do it the other way around because that's the best way to protect the human capital that was mentioned before. So all that to say, we're with you. It's going to be tough. It's a global challenge that in our lifetimes has never been dealt with before. We'll probably look back on our rocking chairs and hopefully we'll give ourselves an A+. Time will tell, but I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Σε ευχαριστούμε. Κυρίες και κύριοι, καλησπέρα.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Fannis Papathanasiou. I would like to welcome you to this event under the presidency of the Council of Europe. The title is The Impact of COVID-19 Pandemic on Vulnerable Groups. Our topic in this session is homeless and COVID-19. We have amongst us expert guests, Mr. Kostas Bakoyannis, Mayor of Athens. Thank you very much. Dimitris Papasteriou, President of the Central Union of Municipalities, KEDE. Thank you very much. Greetings from Trikala. And Mr. Andreas Potakis, the Greek Ombudsman. Now, the topic for your presentations, and we're talking about it with Mr. Stamatis as well, is whether local governments, by looking at other models in Europe, has a more complex and active role in the issue of homeless people and social and welfare services. Especially now with COVID-19, we wonder whether local governments can play an active role with regard and in cooperation with the central government. You have the floor, Mr. Bakoyannis. Good evening. I'd like to greet all the panelists, Mr. Papasteriou, President of the Central Union, and Mr. Potakis, the Greek Ombudsman. It was high time for such a topic to be discussed. Pandemic affected our country ends of February, and throughout these months there hasn't been any public discussion for the homeless and for the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the homeless. We just sweep the problem under the carpet, and the problem is that these fellow citizens are invisible and forgotten. And here local government has a major role to play, because the local government is not judged in theory only, it's judged in practice, in the act. And I am particularly proud for the work being done in the city of Athens. I'm not talking about my work, my personal work, but the work of all the staff of employees in the cities or in the city of Athens and the civil society. I have to say that we wouldn't be able to do anything on our own. What we succeeded in doing, we succeeded in doing it because we united our forces. Maybe you've seen that about 2 months ago, the World Health Organization distinguished Athens and the city of Athens as best practice in the fight against the pandemic. Why? First of all, because in the lockdown, the city of Athens created a new structure for the homeless, a polyvalent center for 400 people, decently accommodated. It is at the same time a daily center, a hostel, and a dormitory. Along with Okana and Kethea, the city of Athens, in record time, created a new structure for the homeless drug addicts. I need to open a parenthesis here and say, all of you listening to me, to us, you may think that all this should have existed in the city for many years, for decades, but now with the pandemic, well, it was kind of a catalyzer because it gave us a new dynamic. Now, with the Public Health Organization, EOD, the street work of Kiada, all the crews of the people going out in the streets day and night, doing thousands of visits to people who are in great need, also do rapid tests. So we also have nurses within these groups of street workers. We have created the conditions in order to protect public health. We're talking about quarantines within quarantines. They are staffed with nurses and doctors. And right now we have 8 centers for tests in the city of Athens, in friendship clubs. We cooperate with EOD for all these ambulant groups and units that go all around neighborhoods of Athens. We can create another 2 quarantine hotels within the city, and we showcase the protection of vulnerable groups of other languages and origins. Especially in the case of Athens, it is an objective social reality we cannot overlook. This is why our radio broadcasts in 14 languages, and we try to be integrated in a network of immigrants, so that through WhatsApp and social media we may be able to make these people aware, refugees and immigrants, of the situation in order to prepare them. I will close by saying the following. This crisis of public health must also teach us a few things, because on one hand it showed all the illnesses of our system and our society, but it also showed that when there is a will, we can actually respond, because maybe in a year, in 6 months, 2 years, maybe COVID will be overcome, but the problem of homelessness will stay with us. This means that we need to have a very good cooperation of all the stakeholders involved. The problem is complex. We're dealing with people on a case-by-case basis. No case is the same, similar to others. We have homeless due to financial problems or due to choice of their own, or homeless because they are mentally ill, or because they are addicts. And the big bet is to reintegrate these people into society. So here we open a discussion with the competent ministry for the program accommodation and employment. The program is there, but it only covers for very few users. We need to give the local government all the necessary tools in order to be able to respond. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Bakoyannis. And now the floor to Mr. Papastergiou, President. Good morning from Trikala. Well, when I saw what Mr. Bakoyannis is doing in Athens, I was really politically jealous of him and of the way that he was able to exploit all the resources of the city in order to cover for this great need. As local governments, we always try to respond to the specificities and the needs, distinct needs of our cities. In our smaller cities, homelessness have a different connotation. We have people, especially in the winter, people who live in homes without rudimentary amenities, heating or others. And this winter that we have is with extreme weather conditions. So local government comes in, as Costa said, to provide solutions. What are such solutions? We need to state out loud what happens with all the, let's say, orphan homes, orphan houses in the municipalities. Now that the cadastre is reaching an end, There are so many constructions, buildings that will be passed to the city. If these cities go to Bakoyani, Zerves, or other mayors, I am certain that we can find the way and the funding to exploit them for such purposes. So, seeing that local governments were greatly mobilized through the pandemic, as of May, we were able to provide solutions. We went door to door with a help at home, City Plus, etc. So we can provide this experience to all municipalities to go ahead with their work. Apart from the homeless, we may have other special cases of people in provincial cities, such as the Roma. What will happen in the Trikala Roma group if there is a case, a confirmed case in their camp? These are families that stay all together in one house. If we have one case in such a society, in such a community, that could have a chain reaction. So if these orphan constructions, if these orphan buildings are given to the cities, I believe that local governments would be able to exploit them properly in order to respond to COVID-19 pandemic and their impact and its impact on vulnerable groups. So as a president of the Central Union of Municipalities, municipalities can go ahead by doing in the act what they had to learn so fast in order to respond and minimize the side effects of coronavirus. Thank you very much. Now let's give the floor to Mr. Potakis, the Greek Ombudsman, and greet the Deputy Minister on our side and give her the floor for short greetings, if you may. Thank you very much. I wouldn't like to interrupt now the discussion. Maybe in the end I can make some comment for closing. So, Mr. Potakis, Greek Ombudsman.
Thank you. I hope that you can hear me well. Let me start from what Mr. Papasteriou just said, speaking about the mayor of Athens, whether if any buildings come to the ownership of the mayor of the municipality of Athens in the next times, I would like to officially say that the Greek Ombudsman does not have a building, so we would like to be hosted somewhere. So let's come now to our discussion. I don't feel comfortable at all because I am here to speak after two mayors who have done so much for the local government, and they have also shown very good reactions throughout this pandemic. Whenever the Greek Ombudsman takes the floor, he or she always speaks about the negative aspects, the problems, the distortions, etc. So that's why I don't feel comfortable speaking after Mr. Pakoyannis and Mr. Papasteriou. But I'll try to be as neutral as possible, focusing on homeless people. Let me start by saying something that you probably all know. The homeless situation has been included within the updated social charter of Europe. The social map has been ratified in 2016 by a national law. So all our actions aim at having no homeless people on the street at all. So today, instead of commenting on the initiatives of our mayors, I would like just to speak about a couple of cases that we had to handle throughout the pandemic related to problems that homeless people faced. Two of the cases regard municipal services. So the first case was the following. The reorganization of the hot meals given for free by the municipality. The churches always give away some of these meals, but I'm going to focus on the ones given by the municipalities. So in many municipalities, we wouldn't have organized meals as we had. Rather, some kits, packages would be given with the materials to use in order to cook a meal. But most homeless people can't use any infrastructure to cook any meal. So this was a problem. So they couldn't have what they needed on a daily basis. So let me say that I didn't get any reports from the municipalities that are represented today in this panel. But indeed, there were some difficulties. The second case is not related to the municipality, but the central administration. And it's a paradoxical one. We were invited to handle a series of incidents where penalties were imposed on homeless people during the lockdown. It is paradoxical, I assume, but I think that the Greek police responded well after the first incidents and early on, so we didn't have major problems. And the third case, to come back to the competencies of municipalities, regards the certificate of a homeless, which is a necessary document for someone to be included in the Solidarity Income Program. And this certificate is given by the OAE, the Organization for Manpower, or the tax offices. During the pandemic, many of the homeless don't have residential data. The social services sometimes go out and conduct a survey so as to ensure the condition of a homeless person so that he or she can be included within this scheme. But we did have problems due to the restriction of circulation during the lockdown. And as regards the scheduling of visits, so that social workers could ensure the status of a homeless person who can be entitled to this solidarity program. So these were some of the incidents that we had to handle. And I do not know whether the mayors would want to speak about these cases. To conclude, I repeat that I still feel uncomfortable, and from this position, I would like to congratulate the Secretary General against poverty, because he responded early on, and until the end of March, he had sent a circular to all the necessary services to explain the legislative clauses that had been published so that the municipalities could take initiatives for the protection of the homeless. I think that the mayor of Athens exploited all opportunities that both the Greek and the European law provided in order to formulate temporary dormitories for homeless. So I would like to congratulate both the local and the central administration for their response. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Potakis. Housing is for your organization is another issue that we're going to discuss later. Let's go back to what you said, and you said that the role of municipalities was very important. What about the central administration, Mrs. Michailidou? Do you believe that this kind of local acting can become institutionalized so that we can have more social protection structures down to the local government level? Exactly, Mr. Papathanasiou. The pandemic and all difficulties revealed new methods and techniques. Throughout the pandemic, the central administration and the local government found a modus operandi that was efficient. And this, of course, can be a good example for the future. Mr. Potakis is correct. Usually, in such meetings, we try to be polite to each other, but indeed, we usually have a lot of complaints, especially on behalf of the Citizens Ombudsman, who is the competent person to show the malfunctions of the state and the disconnection in between the central state and the local authorities. So, within the challenges of COVID, these processes were accelerated and we all became more flexible. I would like to thank Mr. Bakoyannis because we managed to implement very specific actions during the first wave of the pandemic where the responses had to be fast. And I also want to thank Mr. Papastergiou because through him we managed to organize centrally managed actions and centrally funded actions that usually go through the municipalities. For example, Help at Home, which is a program that is operated at the municipal level. And we managed to utilize these services in order to help the homeless. We motivated various mechanisms which are not the most flexible, as we know, from our daily life. But we managed to make them reorganize their daily tasks to help us. So I can say that the municipalities were very flexible indeed, and they responded early in order to help us. Let me give two more examples. One is a central program that now runs in 3 municipalities regarding housing. We managed to have a legislative initiative so that the beneficiaries did not find themselves in a transitory period, in a transitory situation, but on the contrary, safeguard their housing. And the second program, the second thing rather, is the following. In the law, which is under consultation now, we have included two provisions to help the transitory stage of homelessness and vulnerability regarding people who are in closed structures, dormitories, for example, or in guest houses in the case of abused women, and they can take the minimum income, and they can become beneficiaries. So the state can provide housing and also the minimum income to which they are entitled so that they can normalize their daily life as much as this is possible and be entitled to this minimum income and eligible for this so they can become more independent. Thank you, Minister. The mayors, they take the floor for some short comments. Cases that could be pinpointed as good examples throughout the pandemic. What do you think that, Mr. Papastergiou, that what should we prioritize so that the municipality is more flexible?
Especially during the first 3 months, I think that it was quite impressive. Our cooperation and in the hardcore of the civil service were able to solve problems with this food distribution within a few hours. We found ways. We were helped by rental companies, car rental companies, and other companies. Actually, in the act, we did not have many problems, or at least we were able to surmount them quite easily. And in the provincial cities and local government, we were much assisted. Were there municipalities that were not quick enough like you were? I think the Greek ombudsman can say whether there were any complaints about that, but the image that I have is that many municipalities found the way to reach everyone, not to leave anybody alone. And I think that we exceeded our obligations. We took pharmaceutical materials, drugs, we took them home to the people who needed them. I think we acted in a cohesive way and in a very humane way. Of course, the culminating point, I think, was what the city of Athens did for the homeless. Mr. Bakoyannis? If you can switch off your microphone, switch on your microphone. Can you hear me now? I'll be very practical. So there are 5 bullet points for the future, the near future. Housing and employment. Yes, there is an extension to the program. Thank you very much to the Minister and the Ministry, but this extension has very few money and a very short extension. It's a program that started as of 2014. It has shown all these years that there are lots of delays, but there is a great value to this project. If you have discussed even only to one user of this program, you understand the value of this program for these people. So we should redesign this program endow it with a very good budget and funding and implement it very quickly by solving all bureaucratic problems of the past now that we have the experience. This is a catalyzer. It's also a locomotive for all of us and for these people in order to support them in reality. Number two, I'm very happy that we go ahead with the minimum guaranteed impact. And let me explain why the City of Athens is asking for this legislative regulation for months now. We have homeless people in the streets of the City of Athens who are receiving this guaranteed minimum income. If these people enter in our guest houses, in our housing facilities, then they lose this guaranteed minimum income. So they have to make a choice. Either they take the income or they are housed with us. There shouldn't be such a dilemma. We should have solved this problem months ago. Number three, Mr. Papasteriou talked about it. We should exploit buildings, not only of the municipality, but also of the public sector at large in Athens. We have a series of buildings of the broader public area. We were speaking with the minister the other day for some buildings that they have at the ministry. We should be able to exploit these buildings immediately. Number four, bureaucratic processes, especially with regards to permitting. In order to receive a permit, it's as if we were building some kind of nuclear factory. We must become more flexible. We cannot keep the same model for the country as a whole. There will be other specificities for the building in Athens or in Trikala or in Sepolia or in Roof suburb. So we must allow ourselves certain freedoms in order to be effective. Otherwise, we just cancel ourselves and our efforts. And finally, what is most important is the funding. Now that we designed the NEST program and we're talking about this recovery fund, we must try not only to cover the overheads, but also expenses for the renovation or restoration of the buildings, so the refurbishment. By definition or by need, we're not going to a building that used to be a five-star hotel and it's ready to receive people. It will be a building that will have to be refurbished to become humane again. And this should be covered by the co-funded project. We cannot always ask for the contribution of the private sector. We refurbished the guest house that we have in the city for 54 elderly within the project of Build Your City project with the contribution, generous contribution of business people, but it's not enough. The state should give budgeting tools for us to do our work. So these are the 5 bullet points. If we cooperate, we can have a nice and measurable results the next day. Ms. Michailidou would like to say something more. I'd like to say that I'm listening with great interest what you said. Well, the buildings, hopefully, it would only depend on the Ministry of Labor, but it's all the buildings belong to the public sector at large. We are a member of the Ministry of Labor, which now has 600, 500 buildings that are beyond the financial management and legal framework. We have all this property due to expropriations for the social housings that did not take place and for the welfare part of PICPA, where many donations were given. Many families would leave their buildings as a legacy to PICPA. It's a huge project, and nobody has really adopted this project universally in all its sides. And it is true for the project that you said, it's been there for many years with many delays, many problems, but the benefit is very important for all beneficiaries, all users of the program. So in the ministry, we try to design the next step forward as regards the guaranteed minimum income and the logic you described earlier about the dilemma of having the income or a bed under a roof. Then in a few weeks, I can only say that this will be passed in a few weeks with a very short, a very small cost to our budget. I believe that very quickly we are resolving some inequalities and injustices of the past. We were able to be flexible and do some maneuvers quite quickly. Within this period of the pandemic, there many challenges turned to opportunities. We were shown the way to go forward together more efficaciously, more effectively. I would like to thank you all. One moment, I'd like to add something. One of the things that we've done during the period of COVID, we informed the police since in Europe they have criminalized homelessness as in Hungary. We talked to the police so that they could raise awareness to the homeless about structures. Second is what Ms. Michailidou said, that the homeless people, even if they're guests in the guest houses, they should be able to keep on receiving the guaranteed minimum income. And by deliberation of all the stakeholders and the municipalities of the poverty networks, this is very important because now as a ministry we wanted to be aware of all the provisions and of all the issues before we pass a law. We, as the minister said, every 2 years we should be doing a mapping of the homeless, and we should try and see with the homeless how we can enhance the services offered to them. All that, along with the project, housing and employment with the minimum guaranteed income. I think the next step for the next 5 years, because we also asked for technical assistance, is to establish social housing for vulnerable groups in order to extend this social safety network. I know that the Manpower Organization, OAED, will try and offer some housing opportunities to some unemployed or homeless fellow citizens. So we are actually moving towards a different model that will be more substantial. Yes, I think that this is the case, and this is the trend that we are following from now on. Hopefully, local governments and central government will unite forces, enhance the cooperation between them. Thank you all very much.